Welcome to Beyond Sunday at Seymour Heights, a podcast created to go beyond the Sunday service experience, exploring some of the deeper questions of our faith and offering additional content from behind the scenes and from the cutting room floor. Today, I'm joined again by my co-host Jeremy as we continue our look at me and my big mouth. In this week's message, we talked about words as weapons. So just like last week, if you've missed the message, definitely go check that out. So when you think of words as weapons, what do you think about? Do you think raised voices with hurtful words maybe? Maybe gossip or even lies? So Jeremy, tell me this. Have you ever had words that you've used, maybe intentionally or not, that have been hurtful?
I hate to say it, but yeah. Sometimes the thing that comes to mind quickly, we talked about last week, I'm a middle school teacher, and sometimes when 12 and 13-year-olds repeatedly do the same thing over and over and over and over, sometimes the response is weaponized.
Sarcasm in a way.
Sometimes sarcasm is weaponized. Sometimes it's like, how can you not stop this? I've told you 100 times. And sometimes you don't say it quite so nicely.
Yeah.
And you have to apologize. That's the nice thing is I have gotten a chance to apologize to students, and I hope that that's a good thing. And that's the good side of things. But sometimes the initial response is, probably could call it weaponry. Or when we're sitting in the staff room sometimes at lunch and we're just like, I'm going to lose my mind. What is happening? Sometimes the sarcasm can go a little crazy. So
I think too, we're both dads, right?
Yeah.
And so with our kids, I don't want to think it's intentional. And so I want to say that it's unintentional.
Yes.
But I know afterwards I'm like, oh, I've got to apologize.
Yep.
For that one. That one hurt for sure.
At least we know. That's
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. So we talked about the theme of the sermon was words as weapons. And words as weapons can also connect to the idea of speaking truth to power, which is what we talked about in the last episode, right? Yeah. Last week, our heroes spoke truth to power, and it had an immediately positive result for the authority figure and the whole town, right? The whole city of Nineveh. Today's edition, though, has a slightly different result. The authority figure in the story does not have a change of heart. It actually has a terrible reaction at first, but God showed up and he worked in a big way to bring out good in the story. So have you ever run into a law or maybe just a rule that you've had to stand up against?
I don't know that I've had one that I had to, stand up against. Being a teacher in the public school, as an authority figure myself in that role,
right?
Living my life as a Christ follower is one thing, but because I'm an authority figure, there's that delicate line I have to walk where I'm not saying, hey, as your teacher, you should believe that Jesus is the way.
Right.
Obviously, I believe that. Obviously, I try to live that way and show the love of Christ in my classroom, but I can't go in there as an authority figure. And it even is more difficult in the years where I've taught history, because religion's a natural part of teaching history, the history of religion's influence, conflict between governments and religions and all that. So it's not that I've had to say, I'm going to talk about Jesus, but it's knowing my role as an authority figure and knowing I can show the love without preaching per se. So
I wonder too, along the teaching line, my wife is a teacher as well. And there's times where content is put in front of you that you have to teach. And I know there are teachers, so I won't say names, but I know there are teachers that don't always teach that content.
Right.
Because it goes against, your beliefs or a variety of things. And so I know we think about maybe people across the world who are being really impacted for their faith, having to stand up against rules where they can't meet in churches and stuff, but it really can make it be in our lives here too. And so I appreciate you sharing that, Jeremy. So today's story comes from the book of Daniel. And you might think that we're talking about Daniel in the lion's den, but we are not.
No, we're not.
We're talking about another story from the book of Daniel. And so Daniel takes place in the Babylonian Empire. And we were talking earlier before the show about how crazy the Babylonian Empire was. So can you paint a little picture just of the Babylonian Empire as a whole?
Yeah. So, we read our Bible and we are following the Israelites and their story. These are people who follow the Lord and theoretically want to follow his ways. And God said, if you do what I've told you, I will be your God, you will be my people, everything will be okay. But if you don't, your enemies are going to take over. And so after David's king, they survive a few hundred years, a lot of conflict, a lot of war, and then God sends their enemies. So it immediately sets us up that the Babylonians are an empire not interested in following God. There's a lot of idol worship. There's a lot of practices that Jews are not supposed to participate in. And they come in and take over. And the
history teacher in you, by the way, the Babylonian Empire, you talk about in history class.
Absolutely.
It's huge.
It's enormous. And it's a very imperialistic people.
Right.
They're trying to spread as far as they can. And so they there's a couple of ways they do it. Later, when Jesus is alive, the Roman Empire kind of lets the colonies be there, and as long as their practices don't challenge the Roman Empire, they kind of let them have it. The Babylonians did a little bit of that, but they also largely would exile, especially someone who showed promise, and that's Daniel's story, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who we're going to talk about. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are actually not their given names. Those are names the Babylonians said, hey, you're one of us now, so we're going to give you new names because you don't need those Hebrew names
that
anymore.
are really hard to say or even try to spell.
Right. Well, the funny part is because we're not Hebrew scholars, their actual birth names aren't a whole lot easier to say. I don't have them off the top. Let's see if I have them sitting here. But those are names that I also
statement too. It wasn't like Jim and Joe and Sam, right?
No.
So,
but they're names that you and I don't say in our regular lives. Daniel's one we hear. There's a lot of Daniels walking around.
Right.
And
I think this is why, the kids series that we know, if you've grown up around church.
With some vegetables talking to us, maybe.
Yeah, then you would know Rack Shack Benny and a little Nebby K, we may call him today.
Yeah.
If we can have a little creative freedom as we talk about this story.
Bit, yeah.
But yeah, so let's jump into that a little bit more. So King Nebuchadnezzar, right? That one's maybe a little bit easier to say, but tell us a little bit about Nebby K and what he was into.
Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar, he's the emperor. He's a conquering emperor. When you're successful in conquering several times, you might get a little full of yourself, just maybe. And so
you own the whole world that you know of.
Essentially, yeah.
Right.
You own it all. So why not let everybody talk about how great you are? So he builds a golden statue, and I'm always interested in this because in that TV series we talked about, it's a giant chocolate bunny. But I'm wondering, I was like, what is this statue? Is it a statue of him? Is it a statue of a Babylonian god? Is it a statue of something going on, something that happened, maybe the conquest? Who knows? And I look at that, and so he sets up this statue, and he says, anybody, when you hear, no matter what your language is, where you're from, your tribe, your nation, and when you hear all these instruments, and he lists like 5 instruments, which I don't get it, but 4 times they say when you hear the music, you bow down and worship, and they list all these instruments every time. I'm like, okay, I get it. All the instruments are coming, but he says you're going to worship. And you're going to worship this golden statue. You're going to stand there. And so in some way, he wants the glory for himself.
So a question for you for a second is you think about the statue. And I can't help but think it's just giant that anywhere through that close city, right, that they can see it to some level. Or is it maybe a little bit more like the Muslim faith where they pray towards a direction? Like they know it's that direction. They can't they don't see it.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's a curious thing to me too. Is like, did they go out like and you hear like you run out to try to like get eyesight and then worship it, or
No. That's one of those. In the beginning of it, it says people of all nations, and I wonder. It's like, okay, he runs everything. So is he saying kind of what you're talking about? You pray toward Babylon,
right?
or is he saying all the people that he has brought? Because with Daniel and his people, they brought from their homeland to the capital city
Right.
and living there. So who's he talking to? That's an interesting thought. I don't know.
Yeah. And you think too about the just like you said, the gall, that he thinks of himself as high as he does, to say, they're used to worshiping other gods, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to say, I am the one that we want you to worship. And so I wonder, you think about, like, back to Rakshak and Benny for a second, their answer to him. And so we started the episode out talking about speaking truth and power and words as weapons. I don't think it started out really as words as weapons with these guys, but it was just a clear kind of statement.
Yeah. So these guys are newly appointed, or at least in the last few years, and they are essentially working for Nebuchadnezzar. They're in his, maybe not his immediate inner circle, but they're working in the palace, and they just don't do it.
Right.
And man, what's the word? Is it bold? Is it crazy? Is it?
What do you think he's thinking?
I don't know.
I mean, furious, right?
Absolutely. Well, it says he was enraged, but I'm like, he has put them in positions of power,
Right.
because they have shown themselves to be high quality people, high quality men. And now they're not doing what he said, and he brings them in, and I wonder, what did he expect them to do when he brought them in? So he's angry that they're not worshiping. He's angry that they are essentially foreigners,
Right.
that he said, I'm not going to kill you. You're going to come here and be part of my empire. And then he makes a new law, makes a new statute, said you're going to worship this thing. And these three foreigners who already worship some weird god that Nebuchadnezzar doesn't know anything about.
Right.
And then they don't worship. And he's like, I'll bring them in. I'm mad at them. But then what? What's his plan? What does he think they're
Is he
gonna
hoping they're going to apologize? Is he hoping they're going to turn around?
Yeah, everything's good. Everything's
Right.
good. You guys are willing to bow. And so can you imagine if you were in their spot walking in, knowing that it's probably not good, knowing he's probably angry, but also knowing that you're one of his people, and saying, is he just going to kill us immediately? And if so, why didn't he already?
Right.
I guess he had promised if you didn't bow down, you're going in the fiery furnace.
Right.
So do they think they're skipping over the meeting with him and going straight to the furnace? So I don't know.
Yeah. So then, they're in the court, and the question is that he's posed to them, like, why didn't you do it? Like, what's your excuse? And they're like, we don't have to defend ourselves, right? God can defend us, right? We don't have to defend ourselves. Our God can.
It's boldness. I hope I can say I would have if I were in that spot. It's
In a
easy.
confidence.
It's easy for me to sit in this room and say it.
Right. Yeah. But don't,
Yeah,
I
I'd do
mean,
that.
you love it, right? It's like I hope that I would want to do that too.
But then they get to the bigger part. It's not just our God can. And this is the part where I don't know that we have a phrase or a wording strong enough to describe. Our God can, but even if he doesn't, we still aren't going to do what you said. We still will not.
Right.
Like, there's the I'm not going to bow boldness.
Right.
There's the our God can save us. We don't have to defend ourselves. And then there's bring it, King. You got nothing.
Yeah.
It's like,
They have a definite boldness that you don't see.
no.
You're like, where did it come from? I want to know their story. Like, I want to know, like, their history, like how they grew up and stuff too. Like, where did this come from? Where'd you learn it from? But they had a strong faith in the Lord, and so if we look at we'll jump ahead a little bit. So you look at King Nebuchadnezzar's demeanor before. He's angry. He's enraged. He's more mad now, right? Because they're like,
They already defied him.
right,
Now they're saying,
bring it on. And so
Let's go.
he's definitely mad. And so what does he do? He
makes
says
the furnace hotter.
the furnace is already running. I don't know how hot it is outside, but the furnace is running because you have to do things, right? Cook or whatever. And he's like, let's make it hotter. Let's make it 7 times hotter. That's an angry guy, right?
Yeah. These would make such great movies.
Well, if they could survive, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I'm looking at. Can you even think of an actor who could play the Nebuchadnezzar role well and not look corny?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like so angry, already angry,
Right.
and then they say that, and ready to explode 7 times hotter.
What's the animation series with the little emotions, right? The red guy with like the fire shooting out of his head. I know,
Yeah.
that's what I'm
Inside Out.
right, that's what I'm picturing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. He's hot. Now, here's the thing though, right? You and I know about hot things, right? Like fire pits, this is so hot. The guys going in to like fuel it that are just around it are dying, right? So it's hot.
Yeah, I really want to. I know you work with the fire department, so you're around fires a lot more. And not to be morbid, but I think about these guys, and it said the flames were so hot that they came out and killed the soldiers.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I'm like they were instantly vaporized, like. And again, not to make light of something that's not funny,
Right.
but are they on fire running away?
Right.
Like what is this heat?
Yeah.
And also, in our technology, turn the gas up higher, makes the temperature hotter. How do you make a furnace 7 times hotter 2,500 years ago?
Right. See, I think more wood on the fire, more coal on the fire. What is that medium though that they were using? I think though the furnace it's capturing the heat is part of it. So you
Right.
just keep loading it, but you would think there would be like it just stops.
Yeah.
At a certain point because it's not breathing enough. One of the things that fire takes, right, is a heat source, but it also takes oxygen in that flow. And so, I think you were talking about these guys kind of like exploding or vaporizing in fire. Everything has a point at which it will combust, right? And so if they're sitting out there, their clothes are heating up, and you'll see firefighters come out of a house fire, and their uniform will be off-gassing. Like it's getting ready to be at that point where it wants to be on fire, right? You'll see that if you watch videos where couches or whatever is catching on fire, and you'll see it off gas, right? And so that's what I picture with these guys. It wasn't that the flame like grabbed something. It's just it's so hot maybe that it just.
Well, but they're soldiers, so they're probably wearing metal armor too. So I bet it's not comfortable walking as they get closer as well.
As it's melting off of them. I don't know. Anyways,
This is bad for us to laugh about, I think.
we're getting a little bit off topic, I guess, too. But it's hot, right? So
It's hot.
It's hot. He's angry, and so they, it's not bad enough that they just say, okay, let's put him in there. They bound them, and then they send them in, right? And so let's get to that part. What's going on?
So it says that they fell into the fire,
Right.
and then Nebuchadnezzar jumps up and looks because he threw 3 in, and there's 4 walking around. Right. So again, I'm trying to picture this. I love movies, so I'm trying to picture this if it's a movie screen. And so we look in there. Do we see him just like standing back up off the ground? Like you said, if it's bindings, are we? Do you know how long? Let's say regular rope. How long is that going to take to burn up?
Right.
Just a couple seconds, couple minutes.
Right.
And then they just stand up and start walking around. And can you imagine the conversation in there? Is it? Man, I knew God could save us.
Right.
But I didn't know if he actually would. Mm-hmm. But Nebuchadnezzar jumps up and he says, "All right, guys, come. I think I want you to come out of there. Maybe, yeah, come on out, guys."
Right.
And they come out. Now you've been around fires.
Right.
What are you doing in this point? These people have been in fire for
Right.
some period of time, couple seconds, couple minutes.
Right. enough that he's telling them to come out. Fire's hot. I mean, we have what we call the burn box that we go and do drills in. And that, will get up to, 700 degrees. So it's a little toasty. You don't spend a lot of time in there. It's very intentional what you're learning in there, and talking about heat's hot, it's hot higher, and so staying low, right? That's what we teach the kids in school too,
Right.
staying low. But when you come out of that, even though you're only in there for a minute or two, you come out, everything is hot. Everything is off gassing. Everything is scorching. So you don't take anything off, right? You don't touch anything. You stay away from everybody too, because you don't want to burn somebody accidentally because you're hot, right?
Right.
So I think about these guys, and you're like, okay, well now they've just come out of here,
There's not even a smell of fire on them.
right?
The bindings may have burned off, but their clothes are still
They're
there.
still wearing. I know.
And it says they threw them in with turbans on. I assume those are still there. So
Because he didn't let it touch them. So I don't think they were in this story. I don't think I don't think they were hot.
yeah. So then
I don't even know. You talk about fire in that level of heat too, like breathing in there, right? They were encapsulated
entirely.
and protected. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
So he's starts out angry, and now he's shocked. He's called them out, and what's he do?
He does what most of us, again, I hope, or I would think, would be like, oh, your God can do that. Maybe I'm not so hot anymore.
Right.
That word being used in a bunch of different ways. Maybe I'm not so important as I thought it was, which we know throughout the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar gets humbled
He tries.
and then gets a lot of glory again and then gets humbled again.
Right.
It's like the dude, it seems, we talked about last week that the king of Nineveh, his heart was softened.
Right.
Pharaoh's heart was not softened. It seems like Nebuchadnezzar, his heart was willing to be softened from time to time, but also he kind of hardened his heart. And this is one of those times, and it's one of those, like, we look and say, how can you look at this and say there isn't a God? And this is one of those times where, again, their boldness, they go, hey, king, I know what you said the law is. We're not going to follow it. And even if you don't, and our God can save us, which at this point he's like, yeah, your God can save you. We'll see. And then they go, yeah, but even if he doesn't, we still aren't going to do what you want. And so at that point he's mad, and then they survive. And so that thought process is, oh, your God is the one. And so he changed the law, and he said, no, we're not worried about my statue anymore. This is the God, their God. And he says, if anybody says anything about their God, and I forget, I wrote it down and I can't remember what he said. There's a different penalty.
They're going to cut him into pieces.
That's it.
right. So we're not going to put him into the fire enough, because that doesn't work. So now we're going to cut him into pieces.
Also, the Babylonians seem like a cruel people.
I know. Lion's Den.
Lion's den, fiery furnace, or cut you into pieces.
Right. Yeah. But I thought it was interesting that they changed the punishment just to to make it stick. I don't know.
It's almost like I'm like, you changed which person they're supposed to worship because they survived the fire. That doesn't mean the fire was the problem.
Yeah.
It means that
Short-sighted. He missed it.
It means that you were worshiping the wrong God. So you don't really need to change the punishment. Well, hopefully people got the message.
Right.
And that was an opportunity for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in this faraway land to bring some people to know the Lord. Obviously, we know Babylon didn't become some godly nation.
Right.
They ended up being overthrown, which the chapter after this, or the chapter before this, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream about all the people that were going to conquer him, and then conquer them, and then conquer them.
Right.
But I wonder if their boldness did lead to some length of revival at court. Because we know, again, in the next chapter, Nebuchadnezzar is going to have a dream about a tree where, again, it's almost like God is raising him up, telling him how awesome he is, and then saying, you're going to let that go to your head too and screw that up, just like you did with this flaming furnace thing. So it's interesting to see that this this power thing. Daniel did it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did it. Nebuchadnezzar had chances and failed. But it was their boldness that this time at least some sort of turning to the Lord happened.
And their willingness to speak truth to power.
Yep.
To make a difference.
Yeah.
Right. It says a lot. So as we wrap up today, you may not face a burning bush or a lion's den like we talked about, or a giant like David, but we all have our own storms and our own giants that we face. And when we put our faith in Jesus, he's our anchor that holds us to the ground. He's our hope and our foundation. So after hearing today's story, it can seem impossible to live up to the faith of these men. But for us, it can start with little moments where we can practice our faith. And with practice, we can be ready to live out our faith in a big way, maybe even speaking truth to power. Next week, we're going to dig into another story from God's Word, and we're going to continue our sermon series, Me and My Big Mouth, in our podcast series, Speaking Truth to Power. So we look forward to seeing you then, and we'd love to see you at church.